Hi everybody, welcome to our victory garden. This is week 6, and as you can see, our garden is now almost fully planted, and we're just gonna get in there and show you what our plants look like and talk a little bit about mulching and just your next steps. Okay, so let's take a look at some of our plants. As you can see, we've also got a few weeds that popped up, but we'll take care of those in a minute. So first off, we'll just look at some of our squash plants. As you can see, the outer leaves are a little bit yellow and this one's even dying, but then if you look closer, you can see there's new growth, and these are a lot greener leaves, so the plant is starting to adjust to its new home out in the world, and it's going to put on a lot of good new growth. Over here we've got some tomatoes, and you can see as well they are, the outer leaves are just a little bit yellow, they're not quite as nice, but then inside they're growing nice and green and just looking really healthy. So as long as you're keeping them nice and well watered, they should get established really well.
So we already have some weeds growing, so I just want to talk to you a little bit about keeping up with your weed control, doing some cultivation. As we talked last week, we do have some perennial weeds, so this is probably some quackgrass here. There's probably some roots underneath here. With this, if you can actually get the roots out, that's preferable. You can also just go ahead and use your stirrup hoe, and if you use it on a regular basis, then you can just keep any of your weeds from becoming a big problem. So ideally, you're not going to wait until you have big weeds in your garden. You're going to be out here, maybe once a week, just kind of going around all your plants, and that's going to keep your weeds at bay. And just to remember, like, nature doesn't usually have bare soil. It always wants something to grow. So in order to give your plants the best chance, you're just going to want to keep the competition from the weeds down, and so cultivation is going to be your friend.
So now we're going to talk about direct seeding your plants. So everything that you got in your victory garden tray was a transplant, except for also we've got this one packet of green beans. And so direct seeding is a little bit different than transplanting, because you're going to need to know kind of how much you want them spaced apart, and just thinking about what the mature plant is going to look like compared to this tiny seed you have. So we're going to plant it in this bed right here, and to mark out your row, if you want it really nice and straight, you can use the tying string to two just stakes like we showed last video. Otherwise, if you can kind of eyeball it out if you feel comfortable doing that, and that's usually what I do. So I'll just take any tool, so I can take my hori-hori, my trowel, or a rake, and just start it here, and then I'm just gonna kind of wave this so I've got a little bit of a line so I know where I want to plant my seeds. And we've already got another line right here, so you can see these two rows are going to be, I can use my measuring tool, my hori-hori, they're going to be about 18 inches apart, and so that's going to be good row spacing. Bean plants, you can space them out anywhere from a foot to 2 feet. And if you need information on plant spacing, there's just a ton of resources out there on the web or in books or magazines to talk about plant spacing. Otherwise, your seed packets should also have some information if you've got some more seed packets. So I'm just going to get the beans here, and I am just going to drop them in. And so beans like probably, I would say, 4 inches of spacing. It's got my first one here, and as you can see, we've got inch marks on the blade of the hori-hori. So I'm going to just go 4 inches apart. And then once I've got the first couple seeds in, I just usually just eyeball it. It doesn't need to be exact, so I'll just put them approximately 4 inches apart. And then the larger the seed, just kind of a rule is the deeper you're going to want to plant it. So if it's a really, really tiny seed, you're going to want to keep it pretty, just barely covered with soil. But beans are a little bit bigger, so they can be planted a little bit deeper. So for that, I'm just going to, just kind of poke that into the ground, maybe 1 to 2 inches, so that I usually just go you know, if I measure my finger, like my first knuckle's about an inch up from the tip of my finger, so I'm just using the tools, you know, that I've got to kind of plant everything. So I'll just go along and get all the bean seeds planted in here, and then I'm just going to go back and just make sure to fill in any of this trench, and then you know, we know where they are, so we're just going to make sure to really well water this area. So that might be one reason why you'll want to mark them out, is so that you know exactly where your seeds are, so you can make sure they're watered. But we are just going to water this whole bed really thoroughly, and that should get them germinating. All right, so now we've got all of our transplants in, we've got our bead seeds planted, and then we're just gonna talk about if you've got a little extra space in your garden, or if there's a few plants that you really, really wanna grow, so you kind of went out and bought the plants or bought the seeds extra. So as you can see, we've got a whole extra kind of bed space here that we're going to plant some direct seeded varieties. So these would be plants like your greens, lettuce, spinach, your root crops a lot of times, so your turnips, your beets, your carrots. There's just a lot of stuff that does a little bit better by seed, or it's just really time consuming to transplant. So we are just gonna show a few of these plants and get them in the ground, and just try to have a variety of plants that we're gonna work with over the course of the season in case you wanna grow them, or maybe you wanna grow them next year. So I am going to plant some beets right away, and we do have some stakes here, so we are going to mark these out just so we remember where our rows are. And then I'm going to make another just nice pathway here. And beets are smaller than bean seeds, as you'll see in a second here, so I'm not going to plant them quite as deep. Beet seeds, you know, maybe half an inch to an inch. And again, it's really hard to tell, to be really precise about it when you're working with the soil. So it's gonna be pretty forgiving if you're a little bit off, so don't worry about that. And here are the beet seeds. I love beets because their seeds are just so strange looking. So these are probably the reason why I love beets now, is that I just had to grow them because they look so cool, and then once I grew them, then I had to eat them. So that's kind of another way where gardening can help you actually eat more vegetables, because you have this beautiful plant that you admire, and now you're gonna have to eat what you've grown. So here we're gonna plant these, and I am just gonna drop them in, probably about, you know, 1 inch to 2 inches apart. And it's okay if one falls in extra, you don't really need to worry about it. And beets are also a plant where each little kind of seed pod can have more than one like actual seed in it. So you might notice beets will sometimes grow on top of each other. And I'm just gonna go down the row and just keep planting them at this, you know, 1 to 2 inch interval. And then we'll cover them up, and then we'll water them in. And so now we're going to also get a few carrots planted in our garden, and carrots are very, very tiny seeds. So these you don't need to bury very deep at all. You want to keep them pretty shallow, and carrots are one that they really want to be kept moist until they germinate, and just, you know, as much keeping the soil as nice and evenly moist as possible for, you know, they can take up to 3 weeks to germinate. So just keep watering the space and just looking at it every day, and you should see them emerge after a while.
Now we're just going to talk a little bit about what you can do with your pathways. You can certainly just leave them dirt, but then you'll have to do a lot of cultivating, and that can actually get really difficult because they get compacted, and so the hoe doesn't go through them very well. So I usually like to do something with them so I don't have to use a hoe. One option is to use hay or straw. So you can just lay out flakes right in your pathway and walk on them, and that will keep the weeds down. Just to note, the difference between hay and straw is that hay, well, let me start with straw. Straw is a grain crop like oats that has had the grain cut off the top, and then they harvest the actual stalk. And so it's all stalk. Whereas hay is harvested with the top on, and so this is actually rye hay, and it's got the rye seeds in it. And the reason that's an important distinction is because in addition to mulching our pathways, we're also basically seeding whatever's in our hay. So if you can get straw, it's usually more expensive, but it's also usually a much better choice because it doesn't have the seeds in it. So you won't be planting whatever it is that was growing in the field. Another option, and one that I really like, is to seed your pathways to something like clover. Dutch white clover is particularly good. And when I do that, I just give the pathway a quick scuffle with the hoe, and then I just go ahead and toss the clover in. And clover is super tough, so you can just maybe rake the dirt over a little bit, and then you can just walk on it, and it's a very tough plant, so it'll usually come in. Sometimes it can spread into your bed a little bit, but that's always real easy to control. So those are some options for the pathways.
One more thing to think about that is not entirely related to your garden, but is very important to your own personal well-being, is just take care of yourself when you're out in the weather working in your garden. Early morning or later in the evening is a really nice time of the day to work in the garden because it's generally much cooler. So right now it's June 2nd and it's probably 85 degrees outside. So it's pretty warm and pretty unpleasant working outside. So you know, just keep in mind, if you're out there in the hot sun, take breaks, drink lots of water, and just make sure that you are taking care of yourself as well as you're taking care of your plants.
Well, thanks everybody for coming. I think that's what we're covering for this week. Next week we will talk about trellises and or like tomato cages, that kind of thing. And we will talk about soil fertility, and if you happen to do soil tests, we'll talk about soil test results.
And water. Remember to keep watering your plants in. So a good rule is that you should get at least an inch of water in your garden a week, and if we're not getting that, then you will want to add a little more water, watering can or hose, or set up a sprinkler. And I would also, water just a little bit more than that when you have like direct sowed seeds that are just getting started. Just a little extra water just while they get established.
Yeah, so I think that's it for this week, right?
Yep.
Yeah, so thanks for joining us, and don't forget to put comments or put questions in the comments, and we will, as usual, try to get you some answers.
Yep.
Great.
See you next week.
Thanks. Use these hashtags to post pictures of your garden on social media.